India has officially not yet recognized the Taliban government in Afghanistan. So, what explains the engagement by India's top diplomat with the Taliban? I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo Story. On the program today, we decode India's Taliban outreach. Amid rising tensions between Pakistan and Afghanistan, again a development that not many would have forecast, Vikram Misri, India's foreign secretary and therefore the top diplomat of the country, has engaged directly with the Taliban in Dubai. After that meeting, the Taliban made it clear that it did not see India as any sort of adversary. In the midst of all of this remains the peculiar question. This engagement is taking place without India actually officially recognizing the Taliban government. When Kabul fell to the Taliban, there was an apprehension in India and in many capitals around the world that this would mean advantage Pakistan. In fact, one of the first foreign visitors at the time was the ISI chief who was there as Kabul fell to the Taliban. But now there is increasing friction between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and the Pakistan Prime Minister is talking about quote unquote crushing the Taliban. What happened to the Pakistan that had patronized the Afghan Taliban and the Haqqani network and used them, especially the latter, almost as ISI assets? Pakistan tries to distinguish between what is called the Pakistan Taliban, the TTP, and the Afghan Taliban. Are they really separate? Are they working together? What's actually going on? And how far is India's engagement with the Taliban going to go? Is it all about messaging to Pakistan? Let me introduce our very distinguished panel today as we try and decode what's happening. Dr. Happymon Jacob is with us, one of the country's finest strategic affairs analysts, also the editor of a new magazine, India and the World. Do have a look at it if you haven't. Also joining us is veteran diplomat, Ambassador Vivek Katju. Always a pleasure, sir, to have you back with us. And joining us on the program today is former Afghan envoy, Ambassador Ashraf Haidari, who's now, of course, based out of the United States and is working with displaced international communities. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us. Ambassador Katju, do try and explain what's going on here. India has not officially recognized the government, but this is not, of course, the first meeting between Indian officials and the Taliban. That engagement has taken place before, but this is a high-level contact. Vikram Misri, the foreign secretary, meeting with the Taliban minister. Do you see this timed to the rising friction between Pakistan and Afghanistan, or is this an independent, autonomous move towards some sort of realism?
I think the essence of diplomacy, to my mind, and foreign policy lies in realism. And it is because of realism that I had started advocating, much to the annoyance of many of my Afghan friends, and I hold their friendship very close to my heart, from 2017 that India should engage with the Taliban. Why did I say that? And that is relevant today. I said it because I saw, unfortunately, that the Afghan Republic was simply not holding. And I was clear in my mind that unless the political process of the Afghan Republic held, the army would splinter, and unfortunately this came out true. I was also clear that the Americans could not stay there forever to bolster the Afghan Republic, and they were tired of what they called the forever war. In this situation, it was clearly advantage Taliban, and the Taliban were being supported by the Pakistanis. In fact, they were an instrument of Pakistan, and we know all that happened, which led to August 15, 2021. Now, I, for one, did not think that the Taliban were a progressive force. Of course, they are not. We know the theology and the ideology of the Taliban. But the Taliban today control Afghanistan and Afghan territories. They have challenges, but they are the controlling factor. In such a situation, all countries that have an interest in Afghanistan and countries whose interests are impacted by Afghanistan naturally have to have a realistic approach to those entities that are controlling Afghanistan. And in this case, it is the Afghan Taliban. International diplomatic recognition is one thing, and that I
Mhm.
don't think the Taliban are going to get early or quickly. And certainly, I doubt if India would ever be in the forefront of internationally recognizing the Taliban. But
What
that
is the
doesn't.
difference? Could you explain the difference? I mean, if
Inter-
India's top diplomat can engage officially with the Taliban, but we don't actually recognize them as the government that represents the Afghan people, and these are not covert talks, these are not back channel talks. This is an official meeting.
uh, the difference is between de facto and de jure.
Right.
Happymon is the international relations scholar. But in my world of diplomacy, there is a de facto situation which you recognize, and there
Yeah.
is a de jure situation. So you give de jure legitimacy, but if there is a de facto situation, that means someone is controlling a territory, you've got to do business with that person.
Hmm.
If supposing India wants to extend assistance to the Afghan people as it should, because the Afghan people are suffering, then it can't do so without the the cooperation, or at least the acceptance of the de facto controlling authority of Afghanistan, and in this case, it happens to be the Taliban. Now, you ask me uh, whether this is all being the present approaches are because of Pakistan. Two
Yeah.
points I will tell you. One, I believe that right from the beginning, our approach should have been uh, not to pull out the embassy. I was persuaded to that we did the right thing because I was apprehensive that the Pakistanis would play games and that the Pakistanis' action at that time would constitute a real danger to our people, and therefore they had to be pulled out. Once the Afghan Taliban had established it, then they indicated that, look, your security will be assured. The Pakistanis won't be allowed to play games. So we sent this technical team, which has been there. And we are not the only
Yeah.
one. There are a whole lot of Gulf countries. There's China. China sent replaced its own ambassador. There's Russia. There are others. So, uh, so that's one aspect. Second
Yeah.
is Pakistan. Of course, we've got to see what the Pakistanis are doing. And I think the Pakistani record in Afghanistan is one
Hmm.
of mucking up a situation. The Afghans are an independent people. You help
Hmm.
the Afghans, but you can't try to dictate to them how the internal situation should resolve itself.
Yeah,
Now,
but at the same time, Ambassador Katju, I just want to welcome also Ambassador Sinha to the program. At the same time, did you ever think when Kabul fell to the Taliban that you would be seeing a situation where the Pakistani Air Force would be basically bombing inside Afghanistan? I mean, we've come a long way from the ISI chief being the first person to be in Kabul as it fell to the Taliban.
my worry at that stage was that there will be an interregnum before the Taliban and Pindi fell out. And I say
Right.
this on the basis of historical experience. The Afghan government did not recognize, or rather, they opposed the entry of Pakistan to the UN. There's a matter of record. The Durand line, which is the border, has never been settled. There has never been sort of uh, stable relations between anyone in Kabul and in Pindi, Islamabad.
Yeah.
So, in course, and if you go back even to the 1990s when the Taliban were in authority, we now know that the management for the Pakistanis, the management of their relations with Mullah Omar and his people was extremely difficult. Now, so therefore, I was not in the long term. I was not worried that the Taliban and the Pakistanis will all be continuing perpetual honeymoon. But I was concerned with a period of 18 months to 2 years when I thought that things can be bad. And my last point is this: when I said the Pakistanis have an instinct for mucking it, they expect gratitude. There is nothing called gratitude, as I'm sure Happymon and Dilip and Ashraf would say in interstate relations. Interstate relations are governed purely by interest.
Yeah.
And
I think that's,
there is
yeah,
a last
that's,
point. Last point. In 1989, the Pakistanis, when the Soviets were withdrawing, the Pakistanis mucked it up with the Afghans. In 1992, for the life of me, I don't understand when the Mujahideen were determining their government, why did Nawaz Sharif land up in Kabul? As if he was the big lord, deciding things for the Afghans. That really embittered them. We know it. I
yeah.
asked, and
Let's
you'll
hope.
find this interesting, I asked a former ISI chief, I said, भाई ये तुमने क्या किया? उनको क्यों जाने दिया? तो वो कहता है यार मुझसे his exact words were, विवेक यार क्या करें मियाँ साहब माने नहीं. But then in 2001 you had an ISI chief who was grinning and flashing in Serena Hotel. All
Yeah.
will be well, as if now that began the process. I believe you see
Yeah.
this man here who's in
Yeah.
deep trouble, who's
Yeah.
under court martial or whatever. He's the chap
Yeah.
who began the mucking up because the Afghans didn't like it. I think the Taliban didn't like it.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
as far
Let's,
last point is, as far as the internal affairs of Afghanistan are concerned, we've never intervened in them, and I don't think we should.
okay, let's open this up. Before I get Dr. Happymon and Ambassador Sinha, I'm sure Ambassador Haidari is a former envoy. You have heard this patiently and you recognize, as someone who's been a diplomat, that there has to be pragmatism at the heart of diplomacy and a country will be governed by her own interests. How do you see the Indian engagement with the Taliban? And as Ambassador Katju said, what else is India to do if India is concerned about the well-being of the Afghan people, about Afghan women? It's not going to achieve anything by not engaging.
Well, first of all, I'm not here to speak on behalf of the Islamic Republic. That government collapsed and it's gone. It's a failure of everyone, foremost of our neighbors, including India, and of course the rest of the international community.
Why is it a failure of India?
Now
Why do you?
I will explain.
Yeah.
Let me just get to your question. Afghanistan has traditionally been a victim of this mutual strategic obsession that India and Pakistan have had against one another since the partition. It's a fact that was just described by the ambassador, because much of what he said is between India and Pakistan, both sides, of course, applying full realism and pragmatism in their Afghanistan policy, as if the Afghan people did not exist. Even our governments, unfortunately, here and there, naively believing either Pakistan or India, including now certain elements within the Taliban, is a militant terrorist extremist group. And here on the Taliban, India is violating its own stated foreign policy principle that India is committed to fighting terrorism and extremism without distinction in the region and beyond. And here we are in Afghanistan, the foreign secretary going, embracing the same terrorists and extremists who blew up the Indian embassy in Kabul, and of course, killing and wounding dozens of innocent people, including the Indian diplomats and the attaché. It's the same Taliban. If anything, they're worse. If anything, they're deadlier. If anything, they're more ideological and brainwashed. It's not helping Pakistan. Pakistan is already seeing already reaping what it sowed in Afghanistan. And we, the people of Afghanistan, ask India to take a lesson, from Bangladesh, where they lost the Bangladeshi people, and we saw what happened just recently. And here now we are cautioning India against losing the people of Afghanistan, and that they've already done so. That's why our students, halfway through their studies and education, have been denied a visa. For what reason? These were the same students who were admitted. They spent, part of their life to get degrees, to go back and help Afghanistan stand on their own, to help facilitate some of India's core foreign policy interests, including, look east or connect with Central Asia, of course, institutionalized democracy, human rights, and all of that. And India shouldn't step on its values. Realism is not just about, engaging with terrorists and extremists. Realism is also to stand for the principles, that India domestically embrace.
What would you have India do?
But also as obligations under international laws and treaties and United Nations Charter. So it's tragic that India is on the one hand betraying the Afghan people, on the other hand, as the largest democracy, betraying democracy and human rights. Right, and as well as
what would you have India do, Ambassador Haidari?
A statement where India should fight terrorism and extremism without distinction. And the Afghan
what would that translate to?
All of it, and the Afghan people
I have a question.
Feel betrayed. That's why you don't see anything positive coming from the Afghan people who used to favor India among the best in the region and the world. That's not there now, unfortunately.
I hear your emotion and I respect your point of view.
It's not about emotion, it's about facts. It's about facts.
Can I ask a question? Before I go to Ambassador Sinha and Dr. Happymon Jacob, what would you have India do in this situation? It is not an easy set of choices for India as well. I'm sure you recognize that. What would you have India do?
Minimum engagement, just pragmatically for certain issues of core national security interests. I understand that. I've issued some of those issues. I know what India's interests are, but not to the extent where a foreign secretary goes, gives the Taliban that legitimacy, that attention that they're desperately trying to get, simply because India wants to get back at Pakistan. And let's remember, Pakistan just bombed the Afghan people. Pakistan did not bomb the Taliban. Pakistan could have gone, actually assassinated, take down some of the leaders who are still in the pockets of Pakistan. Pakistan, make no mistake, is still wielding overwhelming influence over the Taliban. And look, the Taliban's response, they just sent this caravan of NATO leftover vehicles, all of which were parked along the Doran line in eastern Afghanistan, and they took certainly no action, with some, firings here and there.
Yeah. Okay, Ambassador Sinha, I actually understand how Ambassador Haidari feels at this point, but I equally appreciate Ambassador Katju's point that a country will have to be driven by what secures its national interests at a point in time. Do you believe that it secures India's national interests for India's top diplomat to be engaging with the Taliban? Or do you see merit in the argument made just now that this is it's a risk-laden path? It could alienate large sections of the Afghan people, and it's a kind of betrayal of our own principles, given that our own people, our own officials came under attack from the people we're now engaging with?
Look, it's not just a difficult situation, it's an impossible situation. We don't know what the people of Afghanistan want. We had a situation earlier when there was a government that was there for two decades, and there were terrorist attacks all over the place. Pakistan's ISI was active over there. There were attacks on the Indian embassy. Now you have the Taliban in power there. And the Taliban took over power fairly peacefully, and there was actually no resistance from the government at that time. The president just took an aircraft and fled from there. And now you have a resistance movement based in Tajikistan, which is trying to do something. I don't really believe many of our strategic experts who say that we have strategic interest there. We don't have any strategic interest over there. We can protect ourselves against both Pakistan and Afghanistan, even if they are the best of friends. We are strong enough to do that. Unfortunately for Pakistan, Pakistan has always been talking about its security threat from India, but Pakistan's main security threat comes from Afghanistan. Its longest disputed border is not with India, it is with Afghanistan, and it has been disputed all through its history. So that is an inbuilt problem that Pakistan has with Afghanistan.
But when you say, Ambassador Sinha, that we do not have, according to you, interests in Afghanistan that need a dramatic shift in policy, do you disagree with the engagement?
No, I don't disagree with the engagement. We need to engage with the Taliban government primarily for the aid, that the humanitarian assistance that we are giving to the people of Afghanistan. Our friendship is with the people of Afghanistan. When we were there for those 2 decades, when Afghanistan at one time became the largest recipient of our aid, we helped the people of Afghanistan, whether it was to the hospitals, the kind of respect that our people got, our doctors, our engineers got because of the assistance they gave, that was the people of Afghanistan, and all this assistance was meant for the people. And that is what we are trying to do even now. Now, there was this meeting that took place, and meetings will have to take place because the Taliban also would like to hold meetings. And the meeting took place. The meeting did not take place in Qatar. It took place in Dubai, which is, I think, far more neutral as a place than Qatar. And it was the foreign secretaries on official level meeting as far as we are concerned. And I think it's the right thing that we did. We met the Taliban people. Now we have to look at our further relations. But our main effort with Afghanistan is to provide them humanitarian, medical, and other assistance to the people of Afghanistan. Now, there is the Taliban in power. Taliban, we have had differences in the past. We probably have differences. We have differences even today. But the fact remains that they are the people of Afghanistan who are being, who are extremely poor, have in great trouble. If we provide humanitarian assistance to them, I don't think that should be grudged by the former regime like Ambassador Haidari. They should appreciate and understand that we are trying to help the Afghan people purely out of our humanitarian desire to help them.
Ambassador Haidari, hold on. I need to get in Dr. Happymon. Just hold on for a second, Ambassador. Just give me a second. Okay, you're trying to say something. Let's unmute Ambassador Haidari.
Our people know exactly what they want. Our people want, women's rights, human rights. Just like this, brave lady from India talking to 4 men, questioning us and interviewing us. We want the Afghan woman exactly like the Indian woman, Afghan youth like the Indian youth, because at the end of the day, we're in this shrinking world, globalized, we're right in your neighborhood. You do not want thousands of madrasas brainwashing Afghan youth to be sent on suicide missions to India. And India could just, yes, you're a nuclear power, you're very strong, but your cities, we saw what happened in Mumbai, right? And we know where those extremists and terrorists came.
I think you raise a very
the same madrasas that you are engaging with the graduates of, and they
it's a fair question. It's a fair question.
Tomorrow.
It's a fair question, Ambassador.
Yeah.
It's a fair question to say what might the Taliban tomorrow turn around and do against India. We have seen in the past Afghan terrorists in Kashmir, in the Kashmir Valley. But Dr. Happymon, in fact, one of the questions in our audience is engagement with the Taliban is an endless mirage. There's still a bunch of women-hating warlords. What progress can that country achieve with half the population in an open-air prison? Now, I think Ambassador Katju made it very clear in the beginning that this meeting between the Foreign Secretary and the Taliban does not reflect an endorsement of any kind of the Taliban's policies, especially vis-a-vis its women. As I said in the beginning, we don't even officially recognize this government. What do you think? Obviously, there could be a space between Ambassador Katju, who says he's been advocating for this for many years. Ambassador Sinha says we're engaging, but primarily for aid and relief. Is that how you see it? Or do you think it is inevitable that we have to follow also what's happening between Pakistan and Afghanistan? Hang on, Ambassador Haidari, let Happymon speak. Hang on. Happymon, go ahead.
I think the argument that there should be human rights, democracy, and equality of genders in any country is a valid one. And I, as a citizen of the country, as a citizen of the world, I believe that all countries must uphold these ideals. But I think when it comes to a state, the state makes a certain hierarchy of its interests. And when it comes to the interests of the states, for the state, it is its national, it owes it to the people of that country to safeguard the national security and interest of that. That's exactly what India is doing now. In that hierarchy of interests, Taliban's ideology is less important to India than its attitude towards India, right? So what matters to Delhi is not what Taliban is as an entity, but what it does to India. So in order to ensure that Taliban is not inimical towards India, I think it is India should reach out to the Taliban and engage with the Taliban. I empathize with the argument that the Afghans are making, that they are dealing with a puritanical Islamist entity, which is not really wonderful for a lot of people in that country, no doubt. But who am I as an Indian, or who is the Indian government to go there and change the regime in that country? It is not our business. What is happening in Afghanistan is the business of the Afghan people. They want to change it. They're welcome to do that. It is not the business of the government of India to change the regime there or in any other country in our neighborhood.
But what do you say, Happymon, to the point made by Ambassador Haidari that this sort of Islamist, the patronage of this sort of Islamist entity will eventually or could eventually turn back to bite India's interests? You're making the point about India's interests.
Right. No, so going by that argument, I'd in fact chime in with Ambassador Katju and say, in fact, I take the argument a little further and say that India should further normalize its relationship with the Taliban. There is no need to be embarrassed about or be ashamed about dealing with anyone who is in power in a neighboring country. I can't go to Sri Lanka tomorrow. I can't go to Bangladesh tomorrow and say, unless and until you change your regime according to my liking, only then I will deal with you. I think that age is gone. Would India like it if somebody from London or America landed up here and said, you should change your XYZ, only then we will talk to you? We don't like that either. So, but having said that, I think where I agree with Mr. Haidari is that India must also keep in mind that its relationship with Afghanistan does not end with its relationship with the Taliban. We have a certain responsibility to the people of that country. So give more visas, let there be more students studying in India, let there be more medical visas. There was a time when, as a professor at JNU, I used to have Afghan students. I don't have them anymore. I think they should. So I think the relationship with the people of Afghanistan must continue. I'm completely on board with that. But India must, I think, as I said, keep a hierarchy in its mind of its interests. What comes first? So first is to make sure, and again, let me very quickly agree with another point that was made here, and that is India's interests, in my opinion, in Afghanistan are secondary in nature, not primary in nature. What is India's interest? We must have a calm Western frontier. That's the most important part. That Pakistan does not use terrorism against India. There should be less terrorism in the region. All of that, that's a secondary objective. We don't have any primary objectives, and I agree with Ambassador Sinha as far as that is concerned. So I think India must therefore calibrate its approach to the Taliban and Afghanistan in a careful way. There must be conversations with Taliban. I think it must continue and in fact go to the next level. There must
What is the next level? What is the next level?
More frequent visits, more frequent conversations, more frequent dialogues of this kind. India must look after its interests. I don't mean that we should give diplomatic recognition to Taliban. You don't recognize everyone that you do business with. In sort of difficult countries, you have difficult governments. You have governments that don't have control over the entire territory. Myanmar is a great example. So India must not only talk in Myanmar, but also some of the ethnic armed organizations. It's all part of the game. That's how it is. That's how statecraft is made.
Yeah. Ambassador Katju? Ambassador Katju, you wanted to respond?
Look, there are 2 points here. One, I entirely agree with the proposition that our visa policy has been abysmal since 2021. I've said that openly. I've written about it, that it must change. I think there were security concerns, and one recognized those legitimate security concerns at that stage. But students who were studying here, who were mid-course, suffered a great deal because of the approaches taken by Delhi. And this was simply wrong. Similarly, for medical purposes, and we should have allowed Afghans to come. I mean, I have no doubt in saying this, that we must open up our visa policies and they should
Right.
never have been closed the manner in which they were done. So on that, I have no reluctance in saying. But there's one other aspect that we've not spoken about, which is important, which is this. I won't go into the question of whether it's primary security interest or secondary security interest, but it does impact our security concerns, the situation in Afghanistan. My concern is that we can't allow China to have a free run on Afghanistan. The aim of China is nothing short of integrating Afghanistan and all that is there in the Hindu Kush with their western part. That is not in our interest. I don't believe it is in the interest of the Afghan people also. I think they need a more variety of choice when it comes to economic engagement, which at some stage will have to take place with the rest of the world. But if we do not engage with the Taliban, and I understand Ashraf, who's an old friend, his anguish. I understand that. I mean, I have no reluctance in empathizing with all that he and many of my friends, who are very dear friends of mine, have gone through. But when it comes to the interests of the Indian state, and Ashraf will grant me that, when it comes to these interests, then one has to step back a little and be a little objective.
Yeah.
And my last point, I think it's unfair for any Afghan to blame all the troubles that have taken place in Afghanistan at the door of India and Pakistan.
Yeah.
And there I will read. After all, the troubles began many commentators say the troubles began in 1978 with the Russian intervention. I, for one, believe they began with the Dawood coup in 1973. When the Afghan structure, of course, there were forces within Afghanistan, and Ashraf knows far more about this than I do, when there were Islamist and communist forces and there was a clash. But there was the overlay of the Afghan monarchical system, and things were taking place under its rubric. But Dawood Khan broke that. And we had no role in that. India had no role. I don't believe Pakistan had a role in that. Did we have a role in the rise of communist forces or Islamist forces in Afghanistan and the conflict between the two? No. So
let me Ashraf Sahib to respond to this.
We have a difference with Pakistan on this, and we've got to be very careful. But for an Afghan friend to say that it is that the Afghans don't have any role to play in whatever has happened in Afghanistan over these 50 years and more, but that it is India and Pakistan who are responsible for it, I think it's a little strange.
Ashraf Haidari, sir, you want to respond?
Absolutely, I agree, of course, on the poor Afghan leadership on and off, but let's not forget the overwhelming externalities of the last decade of the Cold War, which fought its hot battles in places like Afghanistan. Although, of course, India at the time took the side of the communist-led party of the Afghan government, and Pakistan, of course, played the Mujahideen, serving the West. But it's a reality at the end of the day, and that played out more directly in the 1990s, where Pakistan tried to influence Afghanistan's politics through these factions that they had harbored, during that last decade. And then, of course, before 2021, it was very clear that the matter of problems facing Afghanistan was, Pakistan's harboring of the same terrorists and extremists which India is embracing and shaking hands with today, tragically. Without that the problems of Afghanistan would have been the problems of the bottom billion, would have been the problems of India today. Weak governance, corruption, poverty, all of that across South Asia, and which are the countries of South Asia, those who are still stable, large in case of India, and of course, as sustainable economic growth are addressing. And Afghanistan would have been in the same place, despite, weak leadership, weak governance, and weak state institutions. But the matter of the problems were the Taliban as a proxy serving Pakistan, more or less, of course, against India. That was the matter of the problem. And
Okay, so
we've been traditionally a victim of this relationship, at least over the last 3
Let's
decades.
pick up that last point with Ambassador Sinha. We haven't spoken about what is actually shifted between Pakistan and Afghanistan. How do we read that? Is the TTP and the Afghan Taliban really distinct entities? What happened to the Haqqani network that India saw as almost an asset of the ISI? Today, the same network is in government in Afghanistan. What has happened? What is happening?
Oh, there's a merry-go-round over there. Pakistan thought that Taliban would be under their control entirely and they would have a proxy government in Kabul. That has not happened. And Pakistan thought that the distinction that they had made and also got the UN to delist the Afghan Taliban, whereas continued to keep the sanctions on TTP, that also did not work out. The TTP have now been given shelter in Afghanistan. And Pakistan is now reaching out to the National Front based in Tajikistan. The DGISI of Pakistan was there in Tajikistan trying to see if they could do some kind of an alliance or some kind of understanding over there to put pressure upon the Taliban. So you have a really cruel merry-go-round going on here between the various forces. There are divisions within Pakistan itself. Pakistan has been trying to win over the loyalty of the Pashtuns inside Pakistan by Islamizing them. Remember, Pakistan had a problem with the NWFP. That was the only part of Pakistan which had a Congress government before partition. And Pakistan has been trying to win over the loyalty of the Pashtuns by Islamizing them. That possibly has not worked out because you still have the problem of Imran Khan over there. That's an internal problem of Pakistan, but it's also linked with the problem of the Taliban and the TTP in Afghanistan. So it's a fairly complex issue. In this whole thing, as Mr. Happymon said, that we have to ensure that whatever regime there is in Kabul is not hostile to us. And if the Taliban have indicated that they do not want to allow the Afghan territory to be used against India, then I think it's a happy sign for us. But our primary interest, as I said, should always be to keep the people of Afghanistan on our side, which is the great gain that we had made. We had lost that out in the case of our support to the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. That has been regained, and that we should not lose that. Yes, there is the threat of China coming in. China will also burn its fingers in Afghanistan, as many other powers have done. But our policy at the moment should be to continue to remain on the right side of the people of Afghanistan. The Taliban government, we have to keep at a certain distance because we don't agree with their policies, but we have to deal with the government that is there in power in Kabul.
Dr. Happymon Jacob, let me give you the last word. When Ashraf Haidari Saab says, you may lose the people of Afghanistan as you have in Bangladesh, we didn't really react directly to that. That is another sort of difficult line we're walking because we have also engaged with the Yunus government despite differences. And I think that's the point, that you engage. You don't stop engaging, unless things really reach a sort of irrevocable meltdown. But is there a risk? Is there a risk in the strategy of engaging with the Taliban at the level of the foreign secretary?
Let me come to that in a second, but I want quickly note my complete agreement with what Katju Saab said earlier, which is the Afghanistan is not a victim, as Mr. Ashraf pointed out, of the India-Pakistan games, that are taking place in the region. I think that's a complete overstatement. The only time India was part of the Afghan great game was when the British ruled India, not after that. So not since 1947. I think that's a matter of fact. But let me come to the other question that you asked by also referring to the point that Ambassador Sinha made, which is The Taliban turning against Pakistan is the story of Afghan sovereign impulses kicking in. And therein lies the lesson for India. The lesson for India is that don't play with Afghan domestic politics. Don't play with Afghan sovereign impulses. Keep away. I think that's the story for us. That's a takeaway for us. And therefore, one day Taliban might turn against us, and therefore we should not engage with them. Is the exact opposite of what I'm saying. We should engage these guys precisely because there is a potential chance at some point of time that Pakistan might use them against us. But for me, the takeaway is very clear. In an ideal world, I would love a democratic republic in Afghanistan. But in the meantime, I am not going to get into the local business of politics and geopolitics in Afghanistan and tinker with their sovereign claims. That's not my business. Back to you, Barkha.
Okay. Before I give Ambassador Katju the last word, I can see Mr. Haidari is very exercised. Last word, very quick comment from you, sir.
Afghanistan, against the Afghan people, against the region, against the world, against the very United Nations Charter which India has signed and needs to commit, endorse, implement as opposed to violate.
We missed the beginning of what you said. What would you have India do?
Sorry?
We missed the beginning part of what you were saying. We missed the beginning. We just got the tail end of what you were saying.
The beginning, you as a woman, Barkha, you did not bring up gross violation of women's rights. We have gender apartheid in Afghanistan as
I did.
Country,
that's the comment I read out. I agree.
Where gender apartheid is institutionalized in is Afghanistan. The only country where extremism and terrorism is institutionalized is in Afghanistan. And it's right in the neighborhood of India, strategically, security-wise, on the short and long term, it's harmful to India's foreign policy and national security interests. We should see the forest, not the trees. Realism doesn't mean that you just are blind to the forest, but just see the trees. But
Ambassador Haidari, as a woman, I have not agreed when Saudi Arabia did not allow its women to drive. I have not agreed with the American Supreme Court's decision on abortion. I have not agreed, absolutely not, with what the Taliban is doing to its women. It repulses me. But the Indian state has to rise above all of those philosophical differences, value differences, to look after itself. And unless you can make a case that engaging with the Taliban will hurt India's interests, Mr. Haidari, unless you can make that case. Sorry, are you trying to say something, Mr. Haidari, before I give Ambassador Katju the last
word? What I'm saying is that violations of human rights will ultimately harm India. Gender apartheid in Afghanistan will give Afghanistan a generation of extremists and terrorists that will come and fight in Kashmir. 100%, mark my words, we will see in 5 years to 10 years.
I think that last point I do want to take to Ambassador Katju, because I'm old enough to remember young reporting days from Srinagar where graveyards of foreign terrorists did have Afghan fighters buried in them. And Mr. Haidari is making the point that life could turn full circle. Okay, you say you're being guided by India's own interests, but there is a risk in this strategy. Closing comments to you, Ambassador Katju.
No, of course we have to be careful. We've got to keep our guard up about Afghanistan, about what is happening there, about the approaches of the Taliban. And not only the Taliban, there are other groups too. After all, there is the Islamic State fighters, and there's a certain fungibility here, and we've got to be careful. We can't let our guard down. But the point I was trying to make, and perhaps I wasn't clear enough, was this, that it would be wrong for Afghan friends to blame India and Pakistan rivalry for all that is happening in Afghanistan. They have to own responsibility for what is happening in their country. After all,
we do have to grant the externalities also. Not India and Pakistan, but the Americans and the Russians. The Americans leaving them in the lurch. Look at the way the Americans left.
I am at no point suggesting that it has not, that other major powers and regional powers haven't played out their games in Afghanistan. I'm not suggesting that. What I am suggesting is that there was a certain responsibility for nation building when it came to Afghans, and that did not take place. I
Fair point.
and I regret to say, I saw the early years of when the Taliban were ousted. I was there from 2002 onwards for about 3 years. At that stage, did the Afghan leadership undertake, and I have no reluctance in saying that at that stage, did the president act like a president? Did Mr. Ashraf Ghani as president act like a president, as a true leader of Afghanistan? Let me ask Ashraf, how many times did your presidents and your political leaders travel in the Pashtun areas to combat the rise of Taliban ideology? Not how many times.
Yeah.
So
Ashraf Sahib,
therefore,
you want
to
to
blame
respond?
everything on outsiders and not look inwards, I think is a
I-
stretch. That is all
I'm
that
coming to you,
submitting.
Ambassador Sinha, and I don't know if Happymon had a point also. Mr. Haidari, very briefly, did the way the president or the former president fled, right? The way he failed his people. I think what Ambassador Katju is saying is that nations collapse when the structures of nation building are not strong enough. And that blame can't be laid at the doors of India and Pakistan, certainly not at the doors of India, that has had no direct participation.
But the
Doesn't
two
even share a
countries
border with Afghanistan.
played a role, and depriving us.
But why would the two countries be India and Pakistan instead of Russia and America or Pakistan?
Institutionalize our positive sovereignty. Our neighbors did that to us. Our neighbors are doing it right now. They're right now not defending the people of Afghanistan, not defending the resistance of the Afghan people, not defending the soft resistance of Afghan women on the streets of Kabul, to the streets of Delhi, to the streets of Washington. No one talks about it because you think it's some philosophical, that needs to be ignored and neglected.
I'm saying as a woman, I feel I'm not saying that.
I'm happy to see you,
I'm saying I feel very strongly
sitting with four men and questioning all of us, putting all of us. I want the same thing for Afghan women.
I agree with you. I agree with you on that.
Women have equal rights, where all nations, we go together, move together, prosper together, be secure together. We cannot achieve this through support and embracing extremists and terrorists.
Let me say this.
10,000 madrasas brainwashing Afghan youth. Tomorrow they will send them to India to explode all those beautiful malls that India has been building and destroy your
Okay, let me come in here. Let me come in here. I hear you. Okay, hang on. Ambassador Sinha, I don't know why I need to say this, but I need to say this because Mr. Haidari thinks I don't feel strongly about what's happening with women in Afghanistan. I do. But I can list 100 other examples from countries around the world where I have really ferocious disagreement with what's happening with reproductive rights in the United States of America. I know it's not comparable to what's happened to women who have been absolutely silenced and invisibilized in Afghanistan. It is disgusting. But unfortunately, I don't think it can define India's state policy. Unfortunately, I wish this was utopia where we could all sort of create an agreed value system for the world and negotiate from there. Ambassador Sinha and then Dr. Happymon, and then we do have to close. Ambassador Sinha.
Well, you're quite right, Barkha. If we start putting human rights as the defining feature of our foreign policy, we'll have to break diplomatic relations with half the world. So that is really out of the question. Afghanistan's internal ethnic differences are very strong, and very few leaders have been able to rise above those differences. The fact is that the Taliban today represent a section of the Pashtuns, and they represent them. There's no denying that fact. They were sent in there by the Pakistanis who nurtured them, created them, and then nurtured them through those 20 years. For us, yes, the disturbances that took place in Kashmir after the Russians withdrew, it was Pakistan that was causing them. Yes, a number of Afghan terrorists were brought in by Pakistan. So it is in our interest to ensure that Afghanistan never becomes a base like that. And for that, we have to reach out to whatever is the government in Afghanistan and engage with that government. I don't think the Afghans themselves, I have never felt that the Afghans, whether Pashtuns or the non-Pashtuns in Afghanistan, will ever be a threat to India. Afghanistan will manipulate them. But anybody who has served in Afghanistan knows that the friendship that the people of Afghanistan have for India is really very, very strong. Vivek would have traveled to Afghanistan. I have traveled to Afghanistan. I never felt insecure in that country, not from the Afghans, the Pashtuns or the non-Pashtuns. The insecurity came from the Pakistani ISI. And that, of course, is a threat that we have. We have to face that.
Yeah. Happymon, closing comment, please. Now. Dr. Happymon?
Right.
Yeah.
I think it is both historically inaccurate and irresponsible to put the blame on India for what the Americans, the Soviets, and the Pakistanis have done in Afghanistan. As I said, ever since the British Empire left India, we have not had any direct involvement in the Afghan Great game, as it were. It's the second point that I want to and I'll make three quick points.
Yeah.
One second is that just because India is not openly criticizing or, let's say, condemning the Taliban for not safeguarding the rights of women and the minorities in Afghanistan, India is somehow responsible for what's happening in Afghanistan is a ridiculous argument. That is square. My third point, I would, as I said early in the beginning, I would say that India's relationship with Afghanistan must not stop with the Taliban. India has a responsibility in some ways to nudge the Taliban to change, to reach out to the people of Afghanistan. I think that needs to happen. To do that, India must and has to engage the Taliban. I think that's the process that's being undertaken, if I understand this policy correctly.
Okay, we'll leave it there. It's been a heated conversation. We understand why it's heated, but I think, as Ambassador Sinha said, it's not just difficult. It is an impossible situation. There aren't any great set of excellent choices to be made here. And for India, paramount would be its own interests. Of course, Ashraf Haidari has argued that India's own interests may not be served in the long run. And that is where the debate will actually have to be on. Are India's interests served or not? But in the short term, at least, clearly, India has made the estimation that engagement is necessary to safeguard those interests. Ambassadors Katju and Sinha, to Ashraf Haidari, former Afghan envoy, and to Dr. Happymon Jacob, thank you so much. And to our audience, thank you. See you tomorrow. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.